Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and tonight we are joined by a special guest, Ashley Stafford, licensed clinical social worker supervisor.
Yes.
Yep, and owner of Canvas Mind.
Yes.
We'll talk about all these things. Ashley specializes in EMDR, as well as some other, as you were saying, ketamine-assisted therapies we've talked about on the show before. We'll get into all your background and just different questions. For those of you listening along, you'll hear my raspy voice. I was at the river the other day where they have the dino tracks here
Yeah.
in Texas, and I think it was humming and singing the Jurassic Park theme song so much with the kids that I just lost my voice. But therapy and running your own center, what got you into doing all this, Ashley?
Oh my gosh. I think when I was a little kid, I wanted to do like one of two things. I was like, I want to be an actress on Broadway because I was really obsessed with Les Mis, which is weird for a kid, I guess, and then, or a therapist. And I guess my parents told me it was pretty unrealistic to be an actress. So I was like, oh, okay, well then I'll do therapy. And I also have like horrific stage fright, so probably wasn't like the best fit for me to be on Broadway. And my personally in my life, my older brother was adopted and had some issues with his fetal development, and so he had some mental health struggles like growing up my whole life. And I definitely felt a level of like empathy and also like the push and pull of what is like realistic for people who are really struggling, how families struggle, and then how the outside world doesn't really understand a lot of the time and thinks that there are simple answers to really complex things that happen in our lives. And I think that just really solidified kind of how I wanted to help people moving forward. I know it sounds kind of dark, but it's like if you can't help your family member, then it's like you want to help somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I always identify for myself that because I went right into it after my undergrad, that it took me a while to realize that I was kind of trying to quasi in my mind fix my family through
Right.
the work I was doing.
Yes, yes. I think that we all do that. I think that's it's like, oh, well, if I really learn about trauma, or if I really learn about mental health disorders, then I will like actually have all the answers and I won't feel bad.
Yeah.
Which isn't how it works.
Yeah, we typically just learn how much we don't know.
Right. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So did you go straight into this as a first career?
Well, yes. So I started with my undergraduate in psychology at UNT, and I studied like parent-child interactions in a research lab there. And then I wanted to go straight into a doctoral program for psychology, which did not happen. I applied to like the top 10 schools in the country, and I did not get into any of them. I was waiting tables at Red Lobster at the time, and I was like, oh, and I got an interview at UT, which I could not believe. Like, I can't believe I must have written a really good essay, like just BS'd it, I guess. Like, I don't know. And when I got there, I literally had a panic attack like the entire day, and cried the entire way home from that interview. I was like, there's no way I'm getting in. I'm going to eat like Cheddar Bay biscuits for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the rest of my life. I'm never going to get out of Red Lobster. But then I started working at Child Protective Services after my undergrad in Dallas as an investigator for a couple years. And then that's when I realized that like, oh, you can go get your master's in social work, and that's a pathway to do therapy. You don't have to get your PhD in psychology to be a therapist. And I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
No one had told me that. So when I found that out, I started applying to graduate programs and went to UTA for my master's in social work, and kind of dabbled in. I really wanted to work with sexually exploited teens, like, human trafficking. I wrote my thesis on it, and I was like gonna do it, and then I ended up not doing that at all once I started kind of getting into the nitty gritty of like, from a social work perspective, how do you treat those issues? And it's like a nighttime job. Like you are up all night. So I didn't think that was really realistic for my life. And then the first job I got out of graduate school was in hospice. And my dad's a hospice chaplain, so it felt pretty natural.
Sure.
And I loved that work. I loved that work. But the on call, I like to sleep.
Hmm.
So then I did some academic work with like grants in underserved communities. And then I ended up working in a psych ER for about 4 years while I was working on starting my private practice and kind of figuring out like what is it that I really want to do when I'm seeing clients, when they're coming to see me, like what is my specialty? Like who do I treat? What am I passionate about? What gets me excited to show up at work every day and work with people? And then that's when I started to figure out like what is the thread that has pulled me through every population I work with, and I think it's trauma. I mean,
It's pretty natural
right,
conclusion for a lot of us, huh?
right,
The longer we're in the field, and especially with severely affected populations.
right, right. And then I just became so passionate about it. Got trained in EMDR, which was life changing for me personally, because then I went and got my own EMDR work done. I was like, oh, I hadn't processed any of this that I thought I had just by verbally talking about it with therapists in the past.
Right.
And once I had that experience, I was like, everybody needs to drink this juice. Like we are like becoming an EMDR cult.
Yeah. And with the EMDR that you do you use light bars? Do you use your hand? Do you use sound? Or is there any variation in that where I'm not even hitting the right
No,
chords?
I mean, I think any type of dual attention stimulus, I think and when I first heard about EMDR, I thought it was kind of like this, you know, eye movement. I thought, well, this is like so woo woo. Like, come on, this is not real. Like, this is not real.
I was young when I was first in the field, and I
Yeah.
remember hearing about this because it was becoming a craze. I was like, "Pff,
Oh yeah, I was like, this
Get outta
is
here.
this is bullshit. Like, no way, no way. And the more you learn about it, like I think you learn that what you need is some kind of a more. The way I think about it is like some kind of more for your body to stay present in the present moment while you're somatically processing what has occurred. And I think that any kind, so light bars, tapping, kids might run in place, draw, throw a basketball or a baseball back and forth, sounds, move, and then any kind of complex dual attention stimulus. So even like counting in your head as you tap or singing like We Rock You,
yeah,
and then tapping at the same time. Any way to help your mind be distracted enough to not get lost in the limbic system is kind of how I think about dual attention stimulus and EMDR. And it's very particular to each person.
yeah."
You know,
You mentioned a really important word, and we like to define the words that you and I use every day on this show. Could you describe for those listening in what they could expect when someone says somatic healing, somatic processing? And we're not looking for an exact definition, just your interpretation as you work with.
oh, sure. I mean, it's when you think about, Bessel van der Kolk, like The Body Keeps the Score, right? It was like a very popular book. Overall, it's saying like trauma is stored not just in your brain, in your body, because your brain is a huge part of your body, right? So your brain is connected to your entire nervous system, your vagus nerve that goes all the way down your body. This is the largest nerve in the body, and then that connects to every single organ system in your body, your lungs, your kidneys, your liver. I mean, everything is so interconnected. And I think sometimes when we think, or historically when we think about our mind or our brain, we always have thought about it like separate from the body.
Yeah,
And that's just factually not true.
sure.
I mean, obviously. And I think that when you're doing somatic work, you're allowing yourself to sit in the sensations that come up in your body when you are talking about good things or not distressing things or
Yeah,
distressing things, very distressing things, and allowing that to move through your body. I'll give an example because I think it's so, I mean, it shocked me. It shocked me. So my older brother really had a lot of problems, and like sometimes he was kind of scary. Like we'd call the cops all the time, you know, like when he was little, they'd have to restrain him. He just had no prefrontal cortex functioning, right? And when he was a teenager, there was a thing where like my parents were like, hey, do you want to go? We got to go get the tires changed. Do you want to stay home with your brother? And I had a little brother at the time too. That was, he's 7 years younger than me. And I was like, yeah, no, I'll stay home. We're good. Like everything seems okay. Like everything's good. And my older brother went on a walk with his friends outside. And then something happened where he started banging on the door. And because I had locked it and he didn't have a key. And initially, I have talked about this so many times, like this thing that happened. And I was afraid to let him in. Yeah. Well, what had happened was that he had gotten beat up outside. And I thought, I didn't know what was happening. I was like a kid and I was like protecting my little brother. And so when I was doing my EMDR training, of course they asked for a volunteer, like who wants to talk about something that was difficult in their life, but you've talked about in therapy a lot, so you're pretty good. I'm like, no problem. I can do it. I'm happy to. And when I started doing the actual EMDR reprocessing in that training, my forearms, the muscles in my forearms started spasming because I had been holding the door. And I mean, it still gives me chills to this day how incredible that is when you talk about somatically holding trauma in your body and then having it release.
Yeah.
I was like, that's it. This is it for me. This is amazing.
Yeah, you know, and we talk about a lot of these different aspects week to week on this show, and I always caveat it with, if you haven't experienced it, because we'll put these things as clips on social media, and you should read some of the comments. It's funny. You know?
Yeah, I will.
Because we get a wide range, especially on TikTok, of just people following, and you never know who the video is going to come across. But I always let people know, if you haven't had the felt experience,
Right.
don't knock it, right? There are multiple forms of somatic work that could help you get in touch with what Ashley is sharing. I found mine through experiential therapy. I did a week-long treatment, and some of the sensations that come up, like if you've never had hot tears, you know, when you're processing, it's like the things that need to come out that you don't know how to get out.
Right.
Is the best way I've ever heard it explained to me. Is I don't know on my own how to get this out, but with EMDR and certain experiential therapies, it gets your mind out of the way of like, I've got to have order.
You're right. Your defense mechanisms, right? Like, because what are therapists the best at? Intellectualizing. I mean, we just talked about it. It's like, oh, we're going to go to school and we're going to figure out all the science behind this problem. And because I have the answers now, then I shall be healed because I have knowledge. And it's just like, it's not the way it works. And I think with any somatic therapy, whether it be experiential or EMDR or any other many modalities that allow you to sit in your body, it just helps you get out of your own way.
Yeah.
Just allowing you to feel it, which is frankly terrifying and super vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, you know, I work with addictions and family members who are affected, mostly family members as the predominant population I work with, but those conversations are always prevalent, right? Sitting with the feeling. And the biggest part of that is educating, like, well, when they ask, well, how do I do that? It's like, well, first we stop thinking it all the way through. We play the tapes in here. We can have the conversations, but when the moment comes up, you know, there's an easy one with 12-step recovery where it's like, when you're sitting in that moment by yourself, you may be fine for a couple weeks, and then all of a sudden that loneliness hits. Don't go do what you were doing before.
Go towards it.
Yeah. You know, it's like you have new recommendations. Call and talk to a human being, all right? Stay in that moment if you can. Get back to that place for just a little bit. Even if you slip and go back to some of the things you were doing, if you can just a little bit by little bit get better at that, you know, that's what we're here for.
Practice makes practice.
Yeah.
That's what I always tell everyone. I'm like, practice makes practice. This is not, you know, we talk about homework in therapy, and any therapist out there that loves to give homework, please don't like shoot me a nasty email. But I always tell my patients, I'm like, look, this is for you to like try. If you forget, if you are avoidant, if you don't want to do it, like that's what I'm here for, so that we come back and we figure out like what was the barrier. Like it's not a master's thesis. You're not getting
Right.
graded on your therapy.
Yeah.
Like I am here to help give you tools, and if it doesn't work for you, throw it in the garbage. Like I don't care. It doesn't hurt my feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. Or we may come back to it 2 years later.
Right.
You know,
It
that
may not be
happens all
time.
the time in long-term work.
Of course.
Well, I forgot I assigned that, you know?
I'm like, oh yeah. They're like, I didn't do the thing. I'm like, what was the thing I
Yeah.
told you to do? I don't know. I don't remember. That's what my notes are for. Yeah, I think it's like practicing that, coming towards your own emotional state rather than pushing away, dissociating, intellectualizing bad feelings, or
Yeah.
even good feelings.
Yeah. How would you, because I feel like when you've been around a long time, we all kind of develop our ways of educating, communicating to our clients, how to break away from that, like bad emotion, good emotion. How do you approach that?
Well, like lucky for us that like Inside Out, the movie was
Yeah,
made.
brilliant
I mean, the first one was good. The second one, me and my husband and my daughters all went to see it together. And me and my husband are just like, because he's a therapist also, we're just like crying. Because I was like, wow, whoever made this like deserves some kind of like humanitarian prize, because you just created emotional literacy for an entire generation of understanding like parts of self, right?
Yeah.
So like in trauma work, if you're going to work with complex trauma, which you are, whether you want to or not, if
Right.
you think you're going to get somebody with just some little, oh, I was in a car wreck once, or oh, I had an assault once, most people who come to me have complex trauma. It is not very common that I get someone who is going to be kind of that regular wham bam thank you man, like do the 8 phases of EMDR, they're good to go. I mean, a lot of people come in and they need the resources to help them get to a place where they can even begin to touch the trauma. And Inside Out, I love to use as an example because it has not every emotion, but it has a very clear example of different types of emotion and ways that they serve you. So anger, anxiety, fear, sadness, disappointment, happiness are all parts of us that are important. There are no parts of us that are bad.
Yeah.
It's just who is usually in the driver's seat, and is that serving you, that part of you serving you in that moment, or do we need to like get to know that part of you a little bit, that feeling that you say is bad, and nurture it? You know, in that movie, the part that really got me is when anxiety is like freaking out and she's like running around and
Spoiler alert.
oh no,
It's been out long enough. I'm joking.
is everyone okay? Close your earmuffs if you haven't seen it. And she's running around and the other emotions are pulling her, and they finally pull her out of this frenzy, right? And she falls to the ground, she cries, and they're like, you need to stop, anxiety, you need to stop. And she says, like, I was just trying to help her. And she cries. And it's like, I know you were. I know you were just trying to help her. I know that that's what my own anxiety does to me, is trying to protect me in some way. It may not be working,
Yeah.
but it's trying desperately to. So then if you go towards that part of you and say like, I see, you're working so hard for me right now.
Yeah.
You are so scared for us. Thank you. Thank you for doing that for me for so long to protect me. And right now we're okay. So
Yeah.
right now you can rest, get your little massage chair and your little tea and hang out, and you don't need to go away. I love and respect you for what you've done for me, but right now I'm going to lean into something else because that's going to help me a little bit more while you rest.
Yeah. Yeah. You can go play and relax and take your time, and I'm the adult. This is on me.
Right. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to have you come up, and don't try to get rid of it. I think that's most of our patients when they have these negative, or what they assign as like negative emotional experiences. Like, I really need to make it go away because having a negative feeling is dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's actually super functional and in like a survival imperative. Like, you need that part of you too.
Well, in interacting with a lot of men over the years, you'll hear narratives of like, I've got to kill this part of myself off, and the
Yeah.
part of the self needs to die, and there's a brutal reality existentially already to life that we're all going to face suffering, and we know this. So it's why these narratives exist, and I think men like to embrace that, whether they know it or not. But that compassionate side of life, like watching you describe it, it's like, well, I hear my therapist in it, right? These are the things I've tried to carry forward. I had this moment when I was telling you about the experiential therapy,
Yes.
where there was one of these exercises where I had to go around my childhood home and collect the different ages of myself
Yes.
to go with me, so that I, as the adult, I'm getting chills talking about it,
I know,
as the adult, could protect them when I confronted the issue with my parents. And it's like, this is what we gear up to do. And I thought it was so important that you highlighted that in order to touch these things, to get to those points, we don't do them without resources. I'll get dudes come in, they're like, I just kind of want to work on a few things. I'm like, brother, there is a laundry list of things that I'm probably going to recommend to you that if you don't do, I'm not going anywhere near that with you.
Oh, for sure.
Because you're not going to take me there.
Yes, and especially when you talk about attachment trauma, which everybody, look, we all have it, some more than others. You cannot go into that without resourcing and giving nurturing to those survival child parts of self that really need to feel safe in order to come forward and process their own pain. They're like locked in an emotional basement.
Yeah, and there's those parts that come out in their mind that really serve you, like when you're pissed off on the road, or someone is confronting you, or does or says something that you don't believe in. So I always think of that teenage part of myself that I had to confront and bring with me, where he was just like, bro, fuck the world.
Oh yeah.
Listening
to a lot of Tool.
Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of say in my development as I was growing as a young. I mean, I'm blasted in tattoos. That's probably his doing.
I mean, tattoos are cool.
I love
Don't get
them.
me
I
wrong;
love
they're
them.
just expensive.
Yeah, I've had the conversation with that part of myself of like, I'm not mad at it. I enjoy who I am, and I'm the adult, so I'll be the one consulting as to whether or not we get any more.
Yes. Your functional adult part versus your survival child, and having those, the push and pull experience, right? Like, who's in the driver's seat? And I think for me, not to like shift gears, but I think like as an adult, when you think about your primary attachment relationships now, like I think EMDR and emotionally focused therapy for couples, like plug to that modality, was incredible and they fit so well together as far as understanding how our own attachment traumas, however they come up. And sometimes when I say attachment trauma, I feel like people think it's like, oh, my parents were horrible or something like that.
Well, it's a buzzword right now, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because maybe we can drill on just kind of how we can relay it in a way that's palatable.
Yes.
But the understanding is always that when we're talking attachment, it's a very complex conversation. It takes years to unfold. These are massive webs that are entangled, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, it's, I think the most common thing, and something that almost every single person who comes into therapy and wants to talk about, or we get to a place where some childhood younger part self comes up and needs to be worked with, it's like, my parents are good parents. I'm like, I believe you. I believe you. That doesn't mean that, like, those two things are not mutually exclusive. Like, you can have attachment trauma and have great parents. We don't choose how our brains respond to distress at certain developmental ages. Our brains will just do it for whatever reason. There's a book, I'm sure you've heard it. It's Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry, What Happened to You, which is my favorite
Oh
trauma
yeah,
book.
I've heard
It's
of this
my
book.
favorite trauma. Anybody out there, I mean, like, I don't get any kickbacks from this, but it like literally was the
I
best
mean,
trauma book.
I'm
that
sure Oprah would have
Oprah.
enough kickbacks for us. Hit us up.
Oh yes, please, please, Oprah. Just the best trauma book I've ever listened to, and Dr. Bruce Perry talks about how, like, shame develops, right, and through perhaps something that is very small. So the example he gave was, there might be a 5-year-old that has a mom, and she picked the kid up from school, and they're driving home, and the kid's like, I really have to go to the bathroom. I really have to go to the bathroom. I really have to go to the bathroom. And mom's like, hold it till we get home. Just hold it. And she's stressed from work, or she, needs to get home for a meeting so that she can put food on the table so that she can pay the bills. And then the kid has an accident, pees his pants in the car, and the mom's like, oh my God, right? That isn't a bad parent,
Yeah, not by a long
right?
shot.
But there are incidents like that happen in a child's life, and then that somehow gets processed in the brain and integrated as I'm bad or wrong in some way. And then little things can happen, even small things, over the lifetime that will reinforce that negative neuronal pathway. And since our brains are wired for survival, we do have a negativity bias. So our brains will attend to those things more readily,
Patterns.
those exact patterns, so that we can survive, not necessarily thrive. Because your brain doesn't
Yeah.
care if you're thriving, it just wants you to live. So if somehow that child, for whatever reason, developed this narrative that I am bad, or I am wrong in some way, and for me to recognize that, then I can be better and I won't disappoint.
Yeah.
That could be an attachment trauma, right? And then that can repeat itself in life all throughout until you get to your primary attachment figure, which is your partner when you're an adult. That doesn't mean your parents were bad.
Right.
It just means that we live life as human beings, and our brains have a negativity bias for survival, and it will read certain situations. And that's what trauma therapy is for us to tell our brain, hey, you are okay. You don't have to hold on to this shame narrative. You're okay.
Yeah, and
You're safe.
you're safe.
You're safe.
Yeah, and it's that safe harbor for adults. The world isn't safe.
Right.
Right. There's a lot of suffering in it, and we need those safe places. I think that's another buzzword we've seen over 10, 15, 20 years that got played out, and now people are angry about it. When you look on the internet, the conversation about having a safe harbor, like therapy, is not so you stay there, right?
Right, you have
It's
to
like
go live
yeah, the same way, right? When you're recognizing these patterns as a kid, and your parent is kind of tossing you out into the world for that independence, and all of these things get entangled, right? And so then you come into therapy, and then that first place, which you know all too well, is like then we get projected on, right? And our job is to hold that conscious awareness that you're explaining, right? As the safety is, back then your parent didn't know, I do, right? It's not that I'm better than your parents, and it's not that I'm good or bad versus they're good or bad.
Right.
It's that I know how to hold that space so that you can work out that pattern of looking at a dude and saying like, well, I think you're an asshole. And, when all I really did was hold up of like, you think you're sad today,
Right,
And
right.
they're projecting like I'm dad telling them not to be sad,
Right.
And then when you get through that, I'll tell you, when you get through that with dudes, the level of trust from there, they'll tell you anything you need to hear
Yes.
from there.
It's so funny you say that, because I always saw myself as like a women's therapist, women's issues, but then I have had so many amazing male clients that are so hungry for that space, because it's really, really tragic, I think, for men to not be able or feel allowed to get in touch with the more vulnerable parts of self so that they can function healthy in their lives. It's like I know toxic masculinity. I get it, but like, I know it's a buzzword, but the truth.
Well, that's used out there.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, like, when dudes ask me about therapy, I tell them it's one of the most masculine things you can ever do
Yeah,
because it's
'cause-
mucky, it's dirty, you're going to be pissed, it's going to be painful.
oh yeah,
But if you do it, you'll be a better man in your community. People will trust you. You'll be a better husband, boyfriend, father.
a hundred
It's
percent.
the most masculine thing that you can do. It does, and I only use that framework for therapy. If you're going to a pastoral counselor, or you're going to 12-step recovery, or you're involved in a community group setting, and you're looking at yourself and talking about your feelings, if you notice, it's the dudes who get wrapped up in not talking about those things that do the most cowardice things that you could imagine.
Right.
Hurting other people is a coward's act.
Right.
Right. But we as men, when we don't take care of ourselves, we lash out and we're
Be-
dangerous.
Absolutely, because it's gonna come out sideways. It always does. It always does. And I think that when we talk about being courageous and being brave, you know, it's like you think about that and like the hero's journey, right? Like this idea that if you want to be a hero and you want to be brave, you do things that are terrifying. You don't do things that you're like stoked to do. Like nobody is going and like slaying a dragon and is like, I'm not afraid. It's like, no, you're absolutely terrified, but you're gonna move forward anyway because it is courage and bravery that pushes you to
Yeah.
do something that is so difficult. And I think being vulnerable is the most difficult thing we can do because it opens you up to so much pain,
Yeah.
potential pain.
And it meets, well, it's that spiritual concept of like it meets the true needs, which is always a fearful, for people in pain, it's always a fearful prospect that if I let the walls down and you know who I am, and that meets this need that's been raw and open, a wound, I don't know how to deal with that. But when you meet that need and take care of it, it's like this is the part you won't know until you do it. We could tell you a million times is that that's when it really opens you up to the true connections in your life, in your community, and interpersonally.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful way to live, like an open way. Like, and when you talk about that, what do I do with that pain? It just reminded me, I love Kristen Neff. And I think Christopher Germer, they do a lot of self-compassion work. And people talk about self-esteem. I'm like, I don't like that word as much as I like self-compassion because self-esteem feels very external. Which I mean, it's semantics. Like, again, no hate mail. If you want to use the word self-esteem, go ahead. I like self-compassion because self-esteem is like, I'm like the best basketball player. I like got 100% on my test, where self-compassion is there for when you fall on your ass and you need yourself to love yourself in your own pain and suffering and embarrassment and shame. And when I started doing my own self-compassion work, the book that she wrote talks about like this self-compassion backdraft. You know, it's like this idea where if you're fighting a fire and you open that door in the room and all the flames are roiling around in there and you open the door and oxygen rushes in, the fire rushes out. And so when you start to do this work of like loving yourself and going towards yourself and being vulnerable and compassionate with yourself, a lot of people will notice it almost hurts because all that love goes in and then all the pain that you've been holding just rushes out in a way very similar to self-compassion backdraft. I don't know what she calls it, but I think that analogy is so poignant because I've felt that myself.
Sure.
When you give it.
Well, we forget, right? It's like this was one that I had to witness over and over to really understand in my young adult life how much I had forgotten as a dude. Like when a child is having a tantrum, that's their attempt at it showing themselves that they matter, you know, which is a huge component of self-compassion. And then how we respond to it as adults is often how that's going to go, good or bad or indifferent, right? But seeing it reminds me of like when the child has the quote unquote tantrum, but really a better way to think about it is like big emotions.
Yeah.
And then you hear that,
Yeah,
you know, it's like
I'm mad.
I felt that way when I was in my 20s in therapy. Like I'm gasping for air here.
Yeah. I love it.
We forget.
Yeah, you forget it. Having a child has helped me remember. You know, she helped. It's funny when you say that. It's like, I have parents sometimes look like, well, do you have any advice for me? Like when my kid is like really freaking out and like having a tantrum, and I'm like, yeah, like just get on their level and be like, you're mad. You are big mad. Like not like sarcastic. I sound really sarcastic, but really, you're big mad, little baby. No, like not like that. Like, keeping on their level, not escalating to where they are, but then mirroring just a little bit of their emotions so they can feel seen. Like you're saying, like what you're experiencing as a 5-year-old matters to me as your parent, and you're allowed to have this feeling. It's not a bad feeling, right? And it is remarkable to me, which, I told you my daughter, she's 9 and she's on the autism spectrum. She's amazing, and she would have these meltdowns, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna try it, and not all the time does it work, but it really helped her just connect, eye to eye. I see you. I see your big feelings. That is such a powerful interventional tool to feel seen.
It's like we know in our professional lives, and maybe just a reassurance from somebody completely unrelated to your situation. It's like we know that we don't have to see it to know it's working, and that's the importance. Because like one of the things I was thinking about earlier, because we've all had as therapists to cross that bridge with clients of like defending their parents, of like they're good parents, right? Like you were saying. So I tell my clients it's 3 out of 10 and they're a legend. They can fail 7 times,
100%.
And I try to remember that in all my relationships. It's like I don't want to fail 7 times, without being conscious. But I'm gonna make mistakes, and with my background and stuff I've worked on as well, it's like I try to wake up every day and turn those defects over as best I can.
Absolutely.
Because when I don't, I'm gonna be leaning more on the 7. Probably maybe 8.
Well, I think too, it's like a remembering of like we all want to be better than our parents, and isn't that what they want for us? If they are a healthy human, right? Not all parents want the best for their kids, frankly. Like there are some that don't, because of their own wounds. But if you have a parent who's relatively healthy, relatively functional, you are going to surpass them emotionally. That is the hope.
Yeah.
I want my kid to be able to be better than me.
Yeah.
In functioning, in emotional wellness. Like, of course I do. We evolve in that way. We should.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think that gives sometimes some permission to just say, like, it's okay that maybe they didn't do certain things right, but they did the best they could with what they had, and they tried to give that to me.
Right.
And then having like radical acceptance for that, and then also like really being proud of yourself for recognizing the things in your family system that have been passed down for years that you might want to do different. Right. I mean, that's cool. Nobody should. You don't have to be ashamed of that.
Right. Yeah, we're the honest ones will look you in the eyes and tell you, yeah, I get it. I don't have to get it exactly the way you experienced it to understand the thread.
Right.
And how we're all connected in those things. And there's that unconscious part that unfolds in attachment work that you were just touching on, where it's like when you outgrow somebody or they outgrow you, especially when it's family, the real attachment is intolerance. And you can see the attachment types of individuals when they cannot tolerate it, and you'll see it in their behaviors. This is why, like with the family disease of addiction, you will see the family scatter like tumbleweeds in the wind. I have some personal experience with that, and my parents maybe tune in sometimes. So I love you guys, but I talk about it on the show a little bit. And
it's okay.
You know, there's been at times less intolerance for some of the recovery things and the growth over the years, and you can see it in the behaviors. There was a point, like when you were saying of the opening of the door, whereas like in the beginning, I was pissed,
Yeah.
right? And then over years, it became like, oh, they're just human too,
Yes.
all right? But the difference remains here, and this is, I tell clients this a lot. Everyone you come across in their adult life has been told they need to do the work. The difference when you step into these rooms is you said yes, and we need to have compassion for those who say no, but that doesn't mean we have to just be okay with it.
Right. Right. It's boundaries are part of you know, and I was just, I'm sorry, I keep referencing these books that I love, but everybody should read them, I think. Oh shoot, what's his name? Terry Real. He has this book called Fierce Intimacy. It's an audio book. It's pretty good. I really like it. I thought it was like one of the best marriage or, adult intimate partner books that really touches on trauma and attachment and the things that we're talking about. And he talks about fierce intimacy as also having like boundaries. Like intimacy does not mean no boundaries. Attachment does not mean no boundaries. Radical acceptance does not mean no boundaries, right? It's like I am accepting you as you are, and then also myself and what I need. It's both.
Yeah.
It's both. And then accepting myself and what I need informs how I'm going to move with you in our relationship, right? With anyone, not just your parents, with friends, with coworkers, with your significant other, with your kids.
Right.
That is not just a fierce intimacy with them, but with yourself, between you and you. Like I need to respect what I need in a relationship, and when it is too much or when I don't like that, when I feel that in my body, like trust, honor, and respect that, and don't project that as anger and resentment towards them, but just honoring what I need and honoring where they are. And that's it.
Yeah. Well, you've even got the hand motions that I use when describing
It's
events.
like,
yeah.
"Eat."
And it calls back to when we were talking about some of the somatic ways we hold on to things. Is like when we're developing these boundaries and working on our tolerance and healing some of these attachment spots in our history. It's like you've got to be able to contain, right, and protect yourself.
Both.
And in the beginning, when you've been wide open, all right, it can be the hardest thing to just bring the motion in to do this.
Sure.
And you may get here sometimes, and then this feels more comfortable. All right, and that's that process. It's like any sport you've ever played, any art you've ever attempted, any skill you've ever developed. The more you practice, the protection.
Easier it gets. The easier it gets to feel safe in it. Because I think when we don't have boundaries, I mean, everything in my mind always goes back to the safety that you experience in your body and in your brain. If your brain and body don't feel safe, you're going to default to whatever survival mechanism your brain thinks it needs to execute to be okay. And emotional pain is registered in some of the exact same parts of the brain that physical pain is. So stepping on a nail or having your partner criticize you lights up similar parts of the brain. The brain doesn't know the difference. Only your prefrontal cortex does. And when you're in distress, your prefrontal cortex is out the window, right? And so noticing how boundaries come into play with that survival skill. Like, is it super rigid because that's how you protected yourself, or is it totally non-existent because fawning over someone or pleasing them was what kept you emotionally safe in your dynamics? And just part of trauma work is really noticing those things, just noticing how it feels in your body when you try. Are you afraid? Are you feeling anxiety? Is your tummy hurting? Are you feeling tense? Like, what is happening? And then exploring that once you're fully resourced. I think that's the thing. Like, I always tell people, resourcing. You can't work with big traumatic boulders when you don't have the safety in your body to hold space for that.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, a lot of times it becomes a game of hot potato when you're not resourced, right? You haven't put your gloves on, right? So when you go in to hold those hot potatoes, you're going to throw them, right?
Yeah.
And some people throw them violently, and some people stuff them even further in, which doesn't help because that's where the fire is that we're trying to get to. So I appreciate just like anybody who's come on and talked about EMDR. One of the things I always appreciate that the professionals who studied it touch on is resourcing, grounding, then getting into the work. And
Yes.
I've loved that imagery too of like the boulders that we get to, because some of them, it's like it's kind of like these backgrounds. It looks like a brick wall, but it's plywood behind it. I can knock this over, but we've got to get to the point where we recognize it's plywood. Because if you're constantly treating it like a brick wall and telling me it's a brick wall, as a professional, I don't know until you let me near it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the most important thing for like young or like newer trauma therapists. Like I think when I was trained in EMDR, like I'm like, oh, I want to get to it. You know, let's talk about every bad thing that's ever happened to you and like really get into the nitty gritty. And guess what? That doesn't work. It doesn't work because you're dealing with people who have, I think I was listening to a podcast, this guy, Thomas Zimmerman was saying 158,000 hours in childhood. And you think about people who have had the majority of that as a negative, dangerous emotional or physical experience where they were consistently protecting themselves from pain and suffering. And the exception is anything good. Those are a lot of times the patients that are coming in.
Yeah, well, that's the vast majority of clients who are ready to seek therapy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you have that recognition, it is almost easier for them to come in and talk about every awful thing. They will try to look, this is just what I need to work on, right? Like, this is what I need to work on. And it is more difficult, I think, as a therapist, and also the most valuable thing you can do is to resource some type of emotionally safe experience for them. And depending on the level of complex trauma, that can take months,
Yeah.
a year, to actually be able to sit in a positive emotion or self-love state because it feels so threatening really to someone with complex PTSD. It's like, I cannot accept myself. If I do that, I will literally die, is what the brain is telling you.
Yeah.
Right? Because that might have been true for them. I will be totally cast out, totally abandoned if I allow myself to sit in self-nurturing, self-love, any positive self state. And so that work is crucial. And that's why I tell you don't have to be fully trained in EMDR to teach people how to resource some positive states, starting with the smallest positive state.
Yeah.
The smallest. What can they access now, even if it's teeny tiny, and allow them to experience that, dip their toe in some type of positive state. If a person's primary negative cognition is I am bad, then you can't resource I am good from the beginning. It might
Yeah.
be something else. I am smart. I am safe now. Something easier, something that they can grab a hold of, and then we can get to fighting against that really deep, entrenched, negative, or I hate to use the word negative and positive, but I don't have any other verbiage for it at this point. But like that shame message or that
Yeah.
fear message that we adapt.
Yeah.
We can't counter it.
The opposition that has motivation, that's kind of like when when I've deconstructed with other therapists the concept of like the negative thoughts. It's the opposition to the best version of yourself
Yes.
with a motivational force to stop you from doing anything else. And when you were describing this aspect of the narratives that we have I think a lot of times we'll hear these things on social media, and I think a distinction we can make is that these things that we learn in our home are not like, if the narrative is you're going to be out, right? This is figurative, right? Not literal. Sometimes it's literal, and we know the percentages of those, and you do as a social worker. But these are the figurative narratives that get created. And so we can start to see, this is why just having a surface conversation about attachment, right? We, as the professionals, need more time with you to untangle those webs.
And create safety between. You know, I think that's, as much as, I mean, everybody says this, I think it's true, is that 80% of therapeutic efficacy is the relationship. And the reason that that is true is because of attachment theory, is because of mirror neurons. You know, this idea that, like, if you see safety in me, if my heart rate is calm, your heart rate is more easily calmed, right? If my voice is soft, your voice will get soft, and also vice versa.
Is yours getting raspy?
Yes, it's now very raspy. I think that's the mirror neurons at work. Yes. You know, and so when I talk to new therapists about doing trauma work and they're scared, it's like, if you can just hold the principle of safety in the space through your own regulation, that has a measurable impact on a patient or a client, whatever you want to call. Not to say I never get dysregulated in session, because I do.
Yeah, it's happened to me.
It happens, you know, if you have a patient who has, you know, personality disorder tendencies, that is, like, for me, a difficult work, because I think I want to challenge, but I have to remember to come back to safety, because people with those particularly people who have any kind of personality disorder, that is the most complex PTSD you can have.
Yeah.
And that is severe attachment trauma. And so that their default is like, I'm going to behave in this way, and I know what to expect from you now. You're going to reject me. You're going to make me angry. You're not going to believe me. You're going to question me. You don't trust me. I'm used to that. I knew therapy wouldn't work. Right? And so regulating yourself and saying, like, what is this person really needing, is not for me to fix them right in this moment. Like, I can't do that anyways.
Right.
So coming back to emotional safety and connection in the space is like my grounding as a therapist. Like, where am I going in my mind that I'm thinking I need to do X, Y, and Z to get this person where they need to be? If I'm doing that, I need to get back into a space of connection and safety in the room.
Yeah, I would agree.
And then it will naturally progress. We have to trust. Oh, my tummy's growling. I hope you can't hear it. Well,
No.
okay.
You're good.
Yeah, I think that is the critical piece that I feel like I have to practice all the time. Because, you know, as therapists, we're like natural fixers. Like, that's like our survival child.
Yeah, if you were ever wondering.
If you're ever wondering what our natural defense mechanism is.
Yeah.
It's intellectualization and caregiving.
Yeah, let me fix you.
Yeah. And I know how, because I've read the books.
Yeah.
I've mentioned 12 of them.
Yeah, I got to keep my hands off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
let
hard.
them sort it out.
It's hard to, but I think through our own therapy work as therapists, and I think that's a beautiful thing about being a therapist, is how our practice of grounding ourselves, even in the session with the other people, has a positive impact on us as clinicians, and it becomes like a circle of positive impact, right? Because I'm practicing my connection, my grounding, my peace. Then I'm able to be more present with you and not pushy about whatever my therapeutic agenda might be in my brain that doesn't need to be happening. And then the natural resilience of the patient can come out.
Yeah.
without me being the expert
That's right.
on their life.
Yeah, that's their job.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question for you that I ask everyone that's been on the show. We're building a mental health amusement park, and you get to build a ride there. What would the ride be called? What would it do? What would it look like?
A mental health amusement park. Oh, this is so cheesy what came to my head, but so cheesy. I'm like embarrassed how cheesy this is. But like a tunnel of self-love. Like, you know, it's like tunnel of love, but it's going to be like tunnel of self-love. And then you like, maybe there's like, this doesn't sound like a really fun ride. I feel like it could actually be very sad. But like, like you have like pictures of you as a child, and then you like give, like you have some practices where you like high five that little kid or like hug that little kid. I was listening to a podcast or something the other day, and she was talking about like looking at yourself in the mirror and like high fiving yourself. And I was like, I love that.
Yeah.
That could be part of the ride. A lot of high fives, a lot of like hugging your child version, like maybe like a what are those like light projection versions of like your child self?
Oh, yeah, like a hologram.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
hologram of your child self. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like going down in like a big, on a little river with a big cushy heart chair. That's what I want.
I like it.
That's what I want.
Any last words for the viewers tonight?
I don't know. Just thanks for letting me be here and babble on about the things I love.
Yeah.
Love yourself. Have compassion for yourself. Practice makes practice. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, Ashley Stafford, licensed clinical social worker and owner of Canvas Mind IOP,
Yes.
intensive outpatient.
Yes.
Where can they reach you for that?
You can go to www.canvasmind.org, or you can email me at ashley@canvasmind.org. And if there's anybody out there that struggles with funding, I'm also clinical director of a nonprofit called ADAR, which you can email for help at ADAR, AADHAR, at pmaplano.com. That is for people who may be unfunded or underfunded that need some mental health support too. So covering the spectrum of socioeconomic status for our peoples.
Perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, we break the cycle here every Friday night at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. We will be back next week, and so will my voice. Take care.